Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next talk. David Pratt will be asking questions of our panel on the war on heritage, so please join me in welcoming Jonathan Tubb, Alexei Karenos, Rima Turkmani, and James Crawford.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and welcome to you all here to Trickware House and the Beyond Borders Festival. As has already been mentioned, my name is David Pratt. I'm contributing foreign editor at the Sunday Herald newspaper, the Herald and Sunday Herald, a correspondent who's spent some considerable time over many years in the Middle East, hence my involvement here. I also, in a previous life, was an art historian at Glasgow School of Art, so I kind of straddle both camps of journalism and the fine arts. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here and obviously chair this particular event, particularly in the company of the panel that we have. Now, they themselves will say a little bit more about their own areas of expertise, but if I could just give you the sort of running order in terms of introductions again. We have Jonathan Tubb, who's a British Museum archaeologist. We have Alexei Karenos from the Institute for Digital Archaeology. We have James Crawford, author-editor, works for the Scotland National Collection of Architecture and Archaeology, and Dr. Rima Turkmani, who's a senior research fellow at the London School of Economics, and herself is indeed Syrian. The way we're going to run this, we're going to have each of our panelists perhaps contribute maybe 3-4 minutes, a little bit about themselves, a little bit about the overarching theme of today's discussion. Then I'll open it up to a kind of cross-panel discussion, and hopefully we can leave plenty of time. I know we're pressed for time, given that I believe the First Minister or someone is actually appearing shortly afterwards, so we need to keep it tight. We'll have an open session with questions and answers from yourselves, the audience. So if I could begin by inviting Jonathan Tubb to make the first of these short presentations. Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed. I am the keeper of the Middle East Department at the British Museum, and I'm also director of something called the Iraq Emergency Heritage Management Training Scheme, which is a terrible mouthful. We just tend to call it the Iraq Scheme. It's a scheme which is funded by DCMS as really the pilot of the Cultural Protection Fund. And it intends to, or what it does do, is to build capacity in the Iraq State Board for Antiquities by training individuals, employees of the State Board, in all the techniques they will need in terms of rescue archaeology, data retrieval, digitization, all of this sort of thing, preparing them for the aftermath. In recognition of the fact that we can't do anything, we call it cultural protection, we can't do anything much on the ground. We can't stand in front of monuments and protect them. I can't send out the British Museum militia, fine body of women though they are. There's nothing much we can do on the ground, but what we can do is to make sure that from day one, when our Iraqi colleagues can get back into hideously disrupted sites like Nineveh, Nimrud, they will know exactly what to do and can work objectively. So over the next 4 years, we will train 50 such individuals. We have just finished part 1 of the training with 6 delightful Iraqis who have now gone back to Iraq for phase 2 of the training, which is actually in the field. We train them for 3 months in theoretical techniques at the British Museum, and then we've set up 2 excavation projects in Iraq, one in the south, one in the north, where we will put into practice what they've learned in theory and train them in all the techniques of field archaeology and rescue archaeology. So it's a great scheme. As I say, it's up and running, and it's something positive we can do amidst all this negativity.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the moment. We'll return to a few of those themes shortly. I'd like to invite James Crawford now for his short presentation.
Yes, I mean, I suppose I'm primarily here because I've just written a book called Fallen Glory, and it's about the lives and deaths of lost buildings. Going from the earliest times, I start with the Tower of Babel, the structure that may have inspired the myth of the Tower of Babel, and I bring it all the way up to the Twin Towers, and actually I bring it even beyond that into the digital sphere. So I suppose what I've been engaging with is the fact that the war on cultural heritage has been a very long one. It's been one that we human beings have been engaged in for as long as they have been building things effectively. That if you look at the greatest agency, both in the construction of buildings and materials, iconography. It's people. Obviously, there are natural disasters, but largely it is people who both build up and who knock down. And my book is, in many ways, an examination of what the motivation is for us to do that, and the extent to which buildings have this incredibly prominent role still in geopolitics. They influence so many different aspects of the world today, even buildings that are incredibly old. And I mean, just to give you an example of that, when I was writing my chapter on the Tower of Babel, one of the starting points was actually, I did some research into a US Marines blog about being taken on a tour from the main airbase in Iraq to the Ziggurat of Ur, which overlooked it, which was actually partially rebuilt by Saddam Hussein, and looks, just the first layer of it looks a little bit like a giant sandcastle. And there seemed a kind of incredible irony or strange parallel to the fact that I kind of wondered what these Marines must have thought about when they were taken to the summit of what, if you like, was one of the world's earliest skyscrapers. And to put it in incredibly crude terms, the reason they were in Iraq is because in currently one of the greatest cities in the world, 2 of the world's tallest skyscrapers were destroyed by an act of kind of catastrophic violence. So the book was really an exploration of the lives of these buildings through time, and the extent to which buildings can outlive empires, they can outlive the people who built them, and by using that window into history, you learn things that you might not learn otherwise.
Thanks, James. I'd like to come now to Dr. Rima Turkmani, who, as I say, is a senior lecturer at Research Fellow at the London School of Economics. Floor's yours.
Thank you. So yes, I am now at the London School of Economics, but I'm a scientist. I'm an astrophysicist with a huge passion for history and archaeology, because I'm Syrian, and you just can't avoid this as a Syrian growing up in Syria. Everywhere you go, there are monuments, and people are extremely, extremely proud of their history. So what I used to do before the war in Syria to protect this heritage is to talk about it, to promote it. I contributed to several documentaries and exhibitions about our heritage. I was planning actually an exhibition with other friends and colleagues about the Syrian heritage at the Royal Academy in 2013. Actually, my last trip to Syria was for that exhibition. I took Robert Hillenbrand of Edinburgh, professor of Islamic art, and other curators from the Royal Academy to Syria. We visited every museum, every site to select what to choose and bring to the Royal Academy. And just can't describe how emotional that was now to think about it, because we were allowed access to every locked place or every basement of all the museums where all the things are kept. We've seen what no one would be able to see, and probably for the last time. And so we realized, how much there is that is not exhibited, never been seen. It's not traceable now if it's being sold in any market. I'm also very interested in the history of how scientific and cultural thoughts traveled in 2 directions between the East and the West. So I'm I'm research fellow of the Royal Society in London. So during my work there, I also tumbled over a very, very important period of history, 17th century, when this Royal Society was founded. And I realized that, as I used to think before, that Syrian heritage is not Syrian heritage, it's the world heritage, and it's your heritage, it's not just mine. That was what I was trying to tell the world. But also the Royal Society, when I just dig the archive, I realized also there's a lot here that is also my heritage, I realized how much, culture and art and history and science was brought from Syria through diplomatic and trade routes in the 17th century and is still alive here. I mean, that is a period when the Levant Company had its headquarters in Aleppo, in the Caravanserai in Aleppo. There was a huge English community living in Aleppo with their doctors and teachers and everything. They played cricket in Aleppo. They brought back horses. The first, the stud of the thoroughbred is from Aleppo. There are 3 trees still alive around Oxford, cedar tree, plane tree, the first ever in the UK, brought from Aleppo in 1640. It's just incredible. So I tried to promote that story as well, and I did 2 exhibitions about it, called Arabic Root, but Arabic with CK as it was spelled in the 17th century, one at the Royal Society and one at the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. What started as a revolution in Syria ended up as a war. I took all these scientific hats, historic ones, and I tried to do everything I can do to end this bloody war. Because it's war on civilians, it's war on heritage as well. It's war not only on the civilians of the present, it's on the civilians of the past. Everything that they left for us. And I started doing research at the LSE on war economy, and this is where I had painfully to come across what is being done to that heritage that I loved. It's being, not just destroyed, as we also what ISIS does to her historical site, but actually, when I did the research, I realized this is just a stunt. This is a PR stunt, actually, and they only destroy the traceable items. What they actually do is they sell everything they have, and they even dig for more antiquities and sell it. I saw all actors in Syria, all actors from all sides, digging antiquities and selling it in the market, abroad to fund the war. So I try now through that research to bring out recommendations of what we can do to end this and to limit it, and what can the international law also do to make the destruction of heritage sites as a war crime that has to be prosecuted.
And
Sure.
also to this issue of the prosecution of that war on heritage itself. But to our final panellist at the moment, Alexei Karenos.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm the second physicist on the panel this afternoon. So I'm an academic at the University of Oxford, so I'm based actually in the physics department. I teach physics and also engineering there, so I have a bit of a background in engineering. But I'm here because I run the technical side of an organization called the Institute for Digital Archaeology. And this is an organization which started a few years ago with the aim of applying digital techniques and technology to the general area of cultural heritage preservation, restoration, and protection. And we work on a number of projects. The most talked about one of those, and I think the reason I'm here this afternoon, is something called the Million Image Database Initiative, which has actually become much more than the database project that it originally started out as being. So what we're doing is working in this area sort of on a number of parallel paths. So we're interested in documenting sites across the world that are endangered for whatever reason. We have a particular focus on the Middle East and in North Africa for very obvious reasons. Not only is there a huge need there in view of the conflict situation, but also, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we progress through the discussion, there is a huge excitement and enthusiasm among local people, particularly among local Syrian people. So we have a huge network of volunteers and people who are running parts of our project across Syria and increasingly in southeastern Turkey. So I think that what we're interested in doing is mobilizing and facilitating local action, giving support to people who know what they need to do to protect their local heritage, have a passion for disseminating, for really giving, sort of putting into the international sphere the message of their history and what it means to them. And also in doing what we can in collaboration and cooperation with other international organizations like UNESCO, like the United Nations, like major cultural organizations like the one that Jonathan represents, to see what we can do to support people and in so doing to protect and support the need in the general cultural heritage sphere. And I think it's very important. One of the things that's come across from what everybody's said is how this is actually a very human endeavor. So what we see on the, we've seen on the television and we read in newspapers about the destruction of physical heritage. So we see objects being destroyed, which is tragic. We see architecture being destroyed, which is something that our organization works on particularly. So we work particularly on large archaeological sites. But the reason that this matters is, of course, the physical objects themselves are significant, but why it really matters is because of the effect that it has on people. Because at the end of the day, the cultural heritage really is something that resides in the hearts and minds of human beings, not in physical things. And their value is in the symbols of the relationship that we have with them. And of course, this is why, getting back to what James has said, that such objects are such powerful structures in the way that we see them along the sort of axis of time of our existence. So they outlive individuals, they outlive cultures, they outlive regimes, etc. And of course, this is why terrorist organizations, are inspired to do them damage, because they're able to exercise not only a sort of propaganda idea, but they're also able to attack people's ideology and to attack their sense of individuality, their sense of community, and their sense of self. So I think that this is a huge project, but one which, as a scientist and somebody who, before I was involved in the Institute for Digital Archaeology, had really very little to do with activities which were truly embedded in the hearts and minds of people. It's an extremely exciting and inspiring area to be in, because there are so many extraordinary people and so many extraordinary stories. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to begin with a very general question to the panel. I mean, Rim sort of alluded to this question. I mean, the title of this discussion is The War on Heritage. I mean, whose heritage are we talking about here? People tend to become very protective of their heritage on a national level. Rim suggesting that this is a heritage that is almost universal and it should be treated as such. Would you agree with that, Jonathan?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we have, if you like, museums like the British Museum, the Metropolitan, the Louvre. This is international, global heritage. It belongs to us all. There are things that are so important that it completely goes beyond any sort of national boundary, state boundary, or cultural division. I mean, it belongs to everyone here.
I mean, who's prosecuting this war? I mean, who are the main perpetrators of this, Rim?
The actors are for themselves. This war is not just a Syrian war anymore. It stopped being a Syrian business long time ago. Without the international support from different countries around the world, starting from the countries of the P5 downward, this war won't be able to carry on, and this heritage won't be destructed. So, I'll give you just examples. There are brigades, for example, that are funded, and their armed activities are coordinated by a military room in Jordan, with the UK present in it and many other countries. These brigades, I know, first-hand expert, they dig up antiquities and they sell it, and they use even diggers, and the methods they use are devastating, like underground explosives to find the tomb or digger. Yeah. So the international community, which we want to take those people to and say, you have to prosecute this, is in a way, indirectly, is part of it. And this is the tragedy. When Palmyra was taken by ISIS, how did that happen? I mean, Palmyra is in the middle of the desert, barren desert around. You can see a rat if it runs through that desert. How did a whole convoy of ISIS fighters go into to Palmyra and capture it, when the sky above Palmyra is controlled by a coalition of 12 countries? How did that happen? When they destroyed the temple of Baal, I was destroyed. I spent the day not talking to anyone, and I was devastated. And then I thought, hold on for a minute. I mean, who are we one day going to take to prosecute about
Yes.
this when the Americans and others were watching and they knew this is going to happen and they did nothing?
I think it's interesting what you say about your response to the temple being destroyed, because I mean, one of the things I neglected to say in my introduction is my background's in law. I studied history and philosophy of law, and if that destruction had been natural disaster, of course you would have been devastated, but probably in a different way, because within legal terms, when a criminal, to commit a crime requires both the act and the intention. And what Islamic State bring is an intention which is abhorrent. And it's abhorrent not just to Syrians, but to everybody. And that's the scary thing, because it's about cultural erasure. And if one person's culture can be erased, another person's culture can be erased. And there's something innately complex, horrible, difficult for us to deal with, but also very powerful, which is why those who want to spread terror use that as their method.
Alexei?
I think it's very interesting, though, on a slightly more positive note. It is now almost exactly a year since the very serious campaign of damage was wrought in Palmyra. And I think I'm somewhat cheered by the way that the world has changed in that last 12 months, because I can remember around about this time last year spending an awful lot of time speaking to journalists and other interested people about why this mattered, about why this was an issue at all against the background of the rest of the conflict. And
Well, that's a good question. I mean, why is it? Because I've heard criticism, people saying, people first, the objects afterwards. It's a commonly held view and belief. I mean,
well, that's why it matters, because people are first. It matters because of the effect that it has on people, and because it is a profound effect. When obviously, nobody would for a moment suggest that objects come before people's lives. Of course, it is important to protect human life above all else. But human life only has a value when it comes together with a quality of life. And the people's history is part of their identity, it's part of who they are as people, it's part of their connectivity with their community and with their general sense of self. And when you start to take that away, when you violate it, what you are actually, you're committing crimes against people. And so this stuff is important first and foremost because of what it means to people. It's important as well because of the inherent value of the object, of course, and that's a very serious issue. But the reason why I think international relief organizations are their primary motivation is not quite the right word, but the real reason why I feel that this should be a top priority is through the effect that it has on people. But what I was going to say just very quickly is that I do believe that attitudes have changed. So I can probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of times that I've been asked that question in the last couple of months. People are really starting to get it, I think. There's a long way to go, but I believe that it has, the message is sort of getting across.
Jonathan?
I think there has been a common misconception for a very long time that people in Iraq, people in Syria, they don't really care about their cultural heritage. It's only we, and our safe havens in the West that actually care about it. It's a nonsense. That is a nonsense. Think about the poor guards at Nineveh who literally stood in front of those remains, those reliefs, and tried to protect them against ISIS. They were beheaded. The family who went to the funeral were rounded up and have never been seen since. Think of the poor man who is a personal friend of mine, Khalid al-Assad, that poor man at Palmyra, who did his utmost to protect that site. He lost his head as well. And countless other people have been in that position. These people care desperately about their cultural heritage. It is a part of their makeup. It is a part of their identity. And that's why ISIS are doing this, to deprive people of their heritage is one of the most inhuman things you can actually do. And that's why it should be, Irina Bokova is correct, it should be a war crime. But there's one other thing, if I may just add, a big change in the last year. To answer your question a little bit, why did no one do anything at the time about Palmyra? At that time, again, there was a feeling that the only people responsible for protecting the cultural heritage was the Syrian Department of Antiquities and Museums. And that is de facto part of the regime. And people did not want to have anything to do with the regime. Fortunately now, a big change has come about, the recognition that that Department of Antiquities, which is the only credible body that does anything for Syrian antiquities, has a much wider remit than the, if you like, regime-controlled areas. Areas controlled by the Free Syrian Army are also under Mamun Abdul Karim's control, and he even pays their staff. People now realize that, so it's now possible for us, our government, our Cultural Protection Fund, to actually help Syria.
You talk about the motivation of IS in terms of depriving people of their heritage and culture. It's a concerted effort to do that, and the sort of political and cultural impact that has. What else are they getting from this? How much do we know about the tangible financial benefits? I mean, there's a lot been written about this. I mean, are they seriously benefiting financially from this?
Look, I mean, when they destroy the Temple of Baal, this is not just for the Syrians. This is a message to the West because it's a famous symbolic object. So, but as I said, they are actually trading in the rest. You know, I think I mean, Khalid Asad is also a family friend. I knew him since childhood. I can't imagine Palmyra without him. But what I know from his relatives that he was killed because he refused to give them guidance to where they can get more artifacts in Palmyra so they can sell it. In Al-Nabak itself, this is a site in Syria, they made $38 million out of artifacts from one site in ISIS. Yes, exactly. But it's not just ISIS, it's all other actors without any exception. You know, in the middle of the war, I think anyone will have the temptation to sell anything that has value in it.
James?
Yeah,
profiteering?
I think there's it's one of the things that Alexei said about the value you place on it, and there's a kind of cultural value you place on it, but of course with cultural value comes monetary value. And I think that's one of the most complex things about heritage is the monetary value that is then placed on things, which allows these markets to develop, the markets in the black markets in antiquities, and the kind of new phrase that's developed around blood antiquities, which is emerges from blood diamonds, and it's effectively using the trade in these things to fund buying arms, to fund warfare, to fund all those kind of objectives that we as I say, we find abhorrent. One of the things, though, in terms of how we tackle that is there's very little known about the scale of the worldwide antiquities trade, actual facts about it. And there's a unit working out of Glasgow actually called Trafficking Culture, which is bringing a legalistic perspective to it and to trying to conceptualize actually what is the scale of this market, what is happening, what is going on, because various attempts have been made to put a monetary value on it, and the reality is nobody knows. No one has any idea. And one of the sort of bizarre ironies of the world is that around the same time that the temple was destroyed, Christie's were selling a funerary statue from Palmyra in New York. List price, I think it was $24,000, sold for $48,000. Now, you could look at that and say scarcity, the fact that you have a specific site that this artifact comes from, which is under direct threat, then results in an increase in the value. And that's the kind of slightly crazy world that we exist within. And the provenance of that artifact was very unclear. And provenance is a very big problem in the kind of antiquities market for everybody, actually, particularly institutions like the museum.
We're not seeing it on the scale, for example, that we saw following the Gulf War. The trade in antiquities from Syria and Iraq is a trickle, and most of what we're seeing is fake. And it's certainly...
Are you suggesting that they're not making this sorts of money, IS, for example?
No, I don't think they are. Either that or they're stockpiling the antiquities somewhere. But you have to kind of put it in perspective. Where are these antiquities coming from? They're not coming from the Syrian museums. They've been locked down and their collections have been moved to Damascus. They're not coming from Iraq museums. They similarly, anything endangered has been moved. So it's opportunist digging. Now, as an archaeologist, I can tell you, it takes a long time to find anything worth anything. So the idea that you go out with a metal detector or a shovel and dig into the side of a mound, you're not going to get very much. You're going to get minor antiquities. Oh, really? But you're not going to get very much, certainly not to sustain an operation of the scale of ISIS. It's not viable. And we're simply not seeing it. We're not seeing that flood of antiquities coming onto the market.
Alexei?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a very difficult problem because, as James has said, there are an awful lot of people who are trying to quantify the problem, and it's almost impossible to do so just because of the nature of the beast. Goods are not openly trafficked. We know that there are certain borders that are porous that shouldn't be porous. So the border into Lebanon, for example, is notoriously porous. It really shouldn't be, but we know there are truckloads of stuff that are sort of making their way through. The question is, where does it go after that? As Jonathan said, it's certainly not making its way onto the Western market, and I think we are seeing the antiquities industry in the UK, certainly we have some links with people who are working out of London, is exceedingly cautious because there's a widespread understanding that one only needs a small number of items of questionable provenance to come onto the market, either items which have been looted or items that are associated with theft of some kind, and it could really the whole industry could collapse as a result of that. So I think that there's, on the positive side, there is a big incentive on the parts of major players like Christie's, like Bonhams, like major trading organisations to try to invest in the problem. So trying to improve documentation, trying to improve general knowledge of what which objects are. Well, what objects are there and where they should be. But I think it's going to be a very, very long time before we're able to really quantify the damage that has been done over the last few years.
I mean, just to be clear then, are we talking about, we're not talking about sort of some private collector sitting in New York or London who's buying these things? I mean, is that a rather fanciful notion? Or does that happen?
I think that happens.
Yeah.
I think increasingly they're in the Gulf states and China now, actually. That seems to be the suggestion of where material may be moving.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's wrong when talking about the destruction of heritage in Syria, at least, to focus only on ISIS or only on the valuable objects that can be sold abroad. I mean, the heritage is being destroyed in situ, and it's because of the war, simple as that. So what we have to do to protect the people and the heritage is to end this war. I'll just give you some examples. The historic house in Homs, I come from Homs, where I had my wedding, was destroyed because of the shelling by the regime. The ancient mosque of Aleppo, which used to be a cathedral before and had the Umayyad minaret that stood up there for 1,000 years, was destroyed by the armed groups which controlled that mosque because they feared the government is going to take it over, and they fear that this minaret is going to be used for snipers. It's a sniper location. So they just, let's take it down. It's a 1,000-year-old. It's the war we have to fight. We shouldn't just focus on ISIS. And there's a lot we can do. There's a lot everyone can do here to add pressure on governments to do what it takes to end the war, because it can be ended, and with external pressure.
Short of ending the war, in terms of policing this, Jonathan, because I know you've been involved and you understand some of the methods being for policing the trafficking trade.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Border Force and with the Metropolitan Police, and so basically that means that whatever they intercept, which is not everything obviously, they bring to us first for our opinion. And very often, as I say, the only stuff that we've seen recently is a mixture of low-grade, low-value antiquities and fakes, but they are in constant touch with us. Things will get through. They can't examine every package that comes through, and also they can't simply seize something unless it's been given a false declaration, and that's usually either description or the value.
I'm keen to open it up to the audience now. If you could just raise your hands if you have a question, please, and we'll get a microphone to you. Lady right at the front to begin with. If you could just wait till we get the microphone to you, that would be great. Thank you.
Most of what you've talked about has been the built and tangible heritage. And the other night I heard Dr. Karenos speak, and I was very struck by his scholarship, his sense of purpose, his optimism, but above all, his sheer courage. And hopefully Irina Bokova, when she comes to Edinburgh in a few weeks' time, will reinforce that. But you've none of talked about intangible culture. You've talked about people, but nobody so far has referred to intangible culture, nor indeed the fact our United Kingdom government has failed to sign the convention, and I'd like your observations on that.
It's nearly signed. It's gone to, it's nearly signed. Look, come on, we've made huge progress within the last 6 months. It's now had 2 hearings in the House of Lords. It's waiting for a third, then we'll go to the Commons. Unless it's derailed by the Antiquities trade, then we should get that through, I would hope, by the end of the year. And not forgetting the 2 protocols that go with it, which are actually even more important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lady over here.
I wondered how significant you thought the decision of the International Criminal Court to prosecute the guy who destroyed Timbuktu was.
James.
Yeah, no, it's obviously hugely significant because it's the first example that there's ever been. And as with any new enactment of a law, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And this is the one example we have so far. It seems effective. Will it be a deterrent? We don't know, in the same way that there are war crimes that have existed for a very long time, which are not a deterrent for those crimes still being committed. But I think it'll be interesting to watch that, and it's obviously a huge step forward.
Gentleman here.
Alexei, I think you mentioned southeastern Turkey, and I was just looking forward, interested to know if that's now considered an area, given the Kurdish situation, whether that's considered an area at risk now after Syria, or if any of the other speakers.
So, and other people may be able to speak to that as well. So it's a very troubled area on account of the border with the country. So there are quite frequent sort of cross-border incursions. It's a very challenging environment for local people, and it's also an area which is extremely rich in relatively undocumented archaeology. So there is a huge amount of potential there. There's a lot of enthusiasm among local people, but there's also an element of desperation. This is not an area which is well serviced by really anything at all. You know, it's very challenging territory.
Lady here.
Thank you. It's a question for Rim, please. I wonder if you could clarify for me something that I think you said, but I'd like some clarification. You were mentioning perpetrators, and you said that brigades were funded and coordinated in Jordan and funded by UK? Can you clarify that? Have I got that wrong?
Sure. There is something called the Military Coordination Room, known as the MOC in Jordan, where it has representatives from most of the countries that support the armed opposition, including the UK. And they coordinate all the armed activities in South Syria from there. And so no battle will take place if it's not approved and funded from the MOC. And they are brigades that are listed as being supported by the MOC. So it's not directly and not only the UK. I mean, the UK, says it doesn't give lethal support. I mean, they give like armor, cars, other things, but there is a kind of sometimes intelligence support. And some of these brigades, which were involved in digging up antiquities and selling it, are registered in the MOC, yes. It's not a secret. I mean, the ones which also destroyed the minaret of Aleppo is supported by Saudi Arabia. And, it's not secret. There is nothing secret in what's happening in Syria. If you look it up, it's all in the internet. You can find the connections. It's a scandal.
Could you just wait for the microphone, please, so everyone can hear?
So we bear responsibility for some of this in UK.
There is indirect responsibility, yes.
That is shocking.
Well, there are much more horrible things these brigades are doing, and everyone. I mean, the Syrian government is also, look what's doing. What can I say?
As you said, there are many actors involved.
Everyone. I mean, even the government, which is thought maybe as more credible in terms of protecting antiquities, but even before the war, a lot have been smuggled and sold for the pockets of officials.
Yes,
and
individuals.
So yeah. So.
We are in UK. What can we do?
What can we do, briefly, before I move on to another question? Any suggestions?
Well, let's say, don't follow the line of Boris Johnson, who said when Palmyra was taken.
I wondered when his name was going to come up.
Yes, I was waiting. You know, when the government took over Palmyra with the help of the Russians again, he wrote an article saying, "Bravo, Assad." Okay, you know, he took back Palmyra. I mean, he forgot that he lost Palmyra in the first place, you know. So certainly not to put heritage above people. Also, I do strongly believe that heritage is also people. It comes together, you know, supporting heritage and people. And I think the UK government has a weight and leverage in the Security Council, and it should use it to bring the Americans and Russians on a deal together.
We're being pressed for time, and I want to get a few more questions in, so if you could keep the questions brief, and indeed the answers brief as well, that would be splendid. Gentleman over here.
Given the amount that the West and other rich countries in the world are going to spend on weapons, nuclear warheads, 1 trillion in the next 10 years, how serious are they really about the survival of heritage when realpolitik and the money that can be made from weapons, the war trade is so total and the commitment to it is so total. I have a horrible feeling of a Band-Aid over a massive wound, listening to you. The Band-Aid is important, but the wound is massive. So surely the push, if you say what should we do, is to fight the arms trade. I'm just asking if that is meaningful in this discussion.
Band-Aid over a wound, Alex?
I think that there is an element of truth to that. I think it is very important, though, to sort of keep things in perspective. I think that's a comment that can be made about all sorts of different areas of life. You know, one could make the same comment with reference to medicine. So I think it's important not to be despairing, but to understand that because of the way that resources are allocated, it's very important that we are persistent and that we are very clear in the message that we give.
Gentlemen.
Rim, another question for you. I was a bit disturbed by your idea that we shouldn't focus on Daesh because while I understand that the destruction is coming from all warriors in this circumstance, and historically that has happened, Daesh, it seems to me, are unique in the way in which they actively want to destroy heritage deliberately. They want to set people on fire and film it. They want to use children to assassinate adults. They want to behead. They thrive on the drama of destruction. And to me, that seems a qualitative difference. But of course, I don't have your experience, and I'd really like your answer.
You know, they don't thrive on the drama. They thrive on feeding us on the drama. I mean, they make a PR stunt. It's propaganda for them. When you study what exactly ISIS is doing, they're very clever, very strategic. You know, they think like a state. They behave like a state. And when they do something like destroying a cultural site, they make sure that they film it, the most dramatic effect, that it's marketed well. So it's a message to you, so that you all focus on this and you get horrified by ISIS. They live by spreading fear. But the reality is different, and yes, we should focus on them, but not only on them. What's destroying the Syrian heritage is the war.
I mean, I've just returned from Iraq on Thursday, and I'm constantly amazed. Yeah. I mean, Abdul Bari Atwan's book, The Digital Caliphate, you know, here you have a body which is, you know, using modern technology, state-of-the-art technology, alongside a 7th century sort of philosophy in that way. You know, it's a very, very difficult group to actually compete with and address in those terms. A few more questions, please, quickly. You know, well, you've spoken before, Tim, I think. Anyone else? Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
A question for the panel on what you feel about reconstruction. I mean, should Palmyra be rebuilt? Should the Temple of Baal be rebuilt?
James?
I'm laughing because Alexei and I have been on Newsnight talking about this. They've actually met, because I was in Edinburgh and she was in London. And my perspective, it kind of relates to one of the questions the lady in the front row asked about intangible cultural heritage. And I sort of had a perspective, I think I probably agree with absolutely everything that the IDA are doing, apart from perhaps the reconstruction on site. Because looking at the history of reconstruction, quite often it doesn't necessarily go well. I'm always persuadable on many different things, and I went to see the reconstruction of the arch in Trafalgar Square and thought it was fantastic, and actually started a trend by asking the security guard if I could touch it which no one else had done, and then watched everybody descend on it and kind of stroke this reconstructed arch. So I think it's incredibly complex. My personal belief is in the power of story. Is that, you know, if sometimes reconstruction, there is the danger of the negation of history and the story of history, not within our generation, but perhaps many generations down the line. And the inspiration for writing my book was actually a visit to the site of Knossos, which, for those who don't know, was reconstructed in reinforced concrete by Arthur Evans, who meant well, but produced something slightly bizarre. And so that I come to it with that experience. And when I first visited that site, I was absolutely bemused by it. But Alexei can give her side of the story.
No, I think it's important to say that it is a very complicated issue, and it's one, there is no simple answer. I think every site, every set of circumstances has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But I think our organisation, so I know that I'm speaking on behalf of our director, Roger Michel, when I say this, feel very strongly on a number of fronts. So firstly, that it's something that should come from the people to whom the site, in the case when we're talking about archaeology, means the most. So if local people feel that they want their archaeological site reconstructed, I don't believe that we here in the West, with our point of view, should try to enforce that, to try to say, no, you know, that's not the right thing to do, it's wrong for some reason. You know, when major cities are destroyed by conflict or by natural disaster, we don't wade in there and say, look, you know, this is not something you should be doing. Most of Europe, and indeed the Western world's major cities, have been partially reconstructed at some stage. You know, London is a reconstructed city. Nobody would have said, hey, you know, we should leave that in ruins because, you know, it's part of the history of the piece. So I think that you know, it's a mean last question to throw. There is no short answer. But I think that it's very, you know, the philosophy, I feel, has to be one where we hand over the decision making to those people to whom this means the most.
Thank you. We are out of time, and I know there are other events about to begin, so I'd like to close here. I'd like to thank our panelists, obviously. A discussion that's immensely intricate, labyrinthine, unresolved in many ways in terms of the legal, cultural, aesthetic implications that surround it, but fascinating stuff, and obviously of concern to all of us. I mean, it is a universal heritage, as we said, and this war on that heritage is something that really must and should concern us all. Many thanks to the panel. Many thanks to yourself for attending. Enjoy the rest of the Beyond Borders Festival. Thank you very much.